Ara us presentarem un vídeo de la Janet Skeslien Charles, que és l'autora de les bibliotecàries del front. Us llegeixo el missatge íntegre que ens va enviar ahir la nit la Isabel Minguillón per la presentació d'aquest vídeo. Bon dia a tothom. Benvingudes a les 18enes Jornades Catalanes d'informació i documentació i, sobretot, benvingudes a la resistència. Em sap molt greu no poder estar presencialment amb vosaltres. Un tema de salut m'ho impedeix, però volia estar present encara que fos a través d'aquesta presentació tal com estava previst. Després de la conferència inaugural de l'Ernest Maragall, això ho tindrem després, us tenim preparada una sorpresa, la sorpresa ve ara. Tot seguit projectarem un vídeo que generosament i de manera desinteressada ens ha enviat l'escriptora i també bibliotecària Janet Skeslien Charles, autora de les novel·les La Biblioteca de París, història basada en les treballadores de la Biblioteca Americana de París de la Segona Guerra Mundial, i Les Bibliotecàries al front, dues novel·les que s'alineen totalment amb el lema i l'esperit d'aquestes jornades. Abans de res, volia agrair expressament a la nostra secretària tècnica, la Carla Blasco, el treball realitzat durant els últims mesos per aconseguir la complicitat de la Janet Skeslien. La perseverància, insistència i capacitat de convenciment ho ha fet possible. A la novel·la Les Bibliotecàries del front, la Janet ens explica un fet real, l'existència del Comitè Americà per les regions devastades de França, conegut com el CART, i les seves voluntàries i treballadores com les CART. En aquest comitè s'incorpora la bibliotecària Jessie Carson, deixant la seva zona de confort a la Biblioteca Pública de Nova York per anar a la França devastada de la Primera Guerra Mundial a ajudar civils, bàsicament dones i criatures. Allà comença una tasca increïble com a responsable de la biblioteca. Comença a reconstruir una petita biblioteca, porta llibres allà on malviuen les dones i els petits, organitza hores del conte al campament base de l'Escart, on la canalla somriu, de nou escoltant històries màgiques i transportant-se a altres mons. També reutilitza camions en biblioteques itinerants per arribar als indrets més llunyans i de difícil accés. Us sona, esclar, els bibliobusos. I més tard formarà les primeres bibliotecàries franceses. En resum, una autèntica activista cultural i des de les trinxeres, sí, des de la trinxera social, un dels eixos de les jornades i sempre reivindicant el seu paper essencial, sanador i de refugi de la paraula, els llibres i la cultura. Aquí voldria citar un fragment de la nota de l'autora que apareix al final del llibre adreçat a les seves lectores. Les biblioteques són un dels pilars de la democràcia. Són dels pocs espais on la gent pot entrar de franc i gaudir de la lectura. Gràcies a les bibliotecàries que s'han sabut adaptar a les necessitats de les seves comunitats. Us insto a donar suport a la vostra biblioteca local i als seus bibliotecaris fent sentir la vostra veu sobre la importància de la lectura i de l'accés als llibres i la cultura. No puc estar més d'acord amb aquest pensament en els moments convulsos que estem vivint darrerament. I acabo desitjant que tingueu unes bones jornades ben profitoses. Des del Comitè Organitzador hem treballat de valent per oferir-vos un programa el més divers, plural, inclusiu i també reivindicatiu. Esperem haver-ho aconseguit. Aprofitem les jornades per aprendre, però sobretot per compartir experiències, projectes i potser pensar en la creació de nous. Quan els professionals de la informació i la documentació ens unim, ens trobem, treballem plegades, surten idees meravelloses, perquè juntes som més fortes. Moltes gràcies a totes i visca la resistència.
Hello, my name is Janet Skeslien Charles, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about the real-life characters in my novel, Ms. Morgan's book, Brigade. Many thanks to Carla Blasco for this kind invitation to address the librarians and information professionals at the Catalan Information and Documentation Conference. Librarians have always been on the forefront of resistance. This is because librarians understand the power of books, education, and reading. My real-life character, Jessie Carson, traveled from New York to war-torn France at the end of World War I because she believed in the power of books and literacy. Today, I'll show you some photos of the real-life characters of Miss Morgan's book Brigade, and then I'll talk about two kinds of censorship. Let's start with that PowerPoint presentation now. So here we are, Miss Morgan's book Brigade and the Catalan Information and Documentation Conference. A librarian leads to another. I came across the idea for this book when I was researching Dorothy Reeder, a librarian who stood up to the Nazis during World War II, and that formed the basis of my novel, The Paris Library. Digging around the American Library Association archives, I discovered that in 1918, during the Great War, a librarian named Jessie Kit Carson traveled from New York to France, where she created something that did not yet exist here, children's libraries. After the war, she transformed dilapidated ambulances into bookmobiles. She trained the first French women as librarians. You can see why a book lover like me would be obsessed. My search for Jessie Carson took me from her native Pittsburgh to Mount Rainier to New York, where Jessie Carson was hired by Anne Morgan, the daughter of financier J.P. Morgan, to head up the library section of the American Committee for Devastated France. In French, it was called Le Comité Américain pour les Régions Dévastées, known by the acronym CARD. Volunteers, who referred to themselves as CARDs, signed up for 6-month stints and spoke French. They had driver's licenses in order to work as chauffeurs. Most were from wealthy families. They paid for their own uniforms, ocean passages, and other expenses. Jessie Kit Carson was one of the few salaried employees, and she signed a contract for 2 years. I got to know Jessie Carson through reading the memoir of fellow Card, Mary Needham, who wrote, "Kit had the power of entering deeply into the loves and hates of her friends. She had a distinct code of friendship based on belligerent loyalty." Needham described life during the war. Offensives were taking place everywhere. Events happened so quickly, activity became so feverish that from one day to the next, we had no opportunity to recover from the fatigue. More than 100 miles we traveled that day over shell-torn roads. When I arrived, I almost fell into my bed from utter exhaustion. I was awakened by the sound of Kit's voice, but I was too tired to answer. It came again, mixed with the sounds of the sirens. "Get up! There's an air raid! Get up! The Germans are coming!" "Let them come," I mumbled. By that time, Kit was upon me like a Boston policeman. "You will get up," she said, as she flung her bedclothes off me, leaving me shivering. I did get up. Jessie Kit Carson was born in 1876. While her father, Thomas, worked as an executive at the Carnegie Steel Company, her mother, Sadie, raised 4 daughters. When Jessie's father died suddenly of pneumonia, the family fell on hard times. Despite the difficulties, the sisters were a great support to each other. They penned and shared poems and also enjoyed reading. Jessie trained to be a librarian and began to work in the children's section of the Pittsburgh Library. In 1907, she moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she continued her library career while taking on other challenges, including becoming one of the first women to climb Mount Rainier. Her children's section was declared the most advanced in the library. According to the newspaper Tacoma Times, Miss Carson's fervent eloquence has won her a warm corner in the hearts of her little devotees. A few years later, Miss Carson is recognized as the leading children's librarian in the entire Northwest. And then the next headline read, "Jessie Carson goes to New York." Perhaps feeling she accomplished all she could, Jessie Carson wanted another challenge. Or perhaps she wanted to live closer to her mother and sisters. In 1914, Jessie took the position of assistant director of the children's section of the New York Public Library, where she worked under Anne Carroll Moore, the first librarian in America to allow children to sign for their own books. I couldn't help but wonder, what would it feel like to move from director to assistant, from being in charge to following orders? And would the move to the New York Public Library be worth a demotion? When Jessie wasn't at the library, she volunteered for the National League of Women's Service, whose treasurer was another Anne Morgan, daughter of J.P. Morgan. Morgan handpicked Carson to lead the CARD's library program. This all-women aid organization helped French civilians who'd lost their homes and livelihoods because of war. In a letter to her mother, Jessie Carson's excitement at meeting Anne Morgan is palpable. I have heard her give the most thrilling talk on France. It makes my blood hum to realize what I am going to undertake. I didn't realize that Miss Morgan would be such a fairy godmother. Though the job was in war-torn France, Jessie jumped at the chance to lead again. So here we see that Jessie Carson not only climbed mountains, she moved mountains in order to help children in war-torn France. When I was in school, we learned that France was occupied by the Germans in World War II. But in researching this novel, I learned about the brutal occupation of northern France during the Great War. Unfortunately, most able-bodied Frenchmen were either in the army, prisoners of war, or dead. Some Northerners fled, but for 3 long years, the women, children, and old men who remained were enslaved and half-starved. German soldiers were billeted in the homes of these French families, making for a painful cohabitation. When the Allied forces were able to drive back the enemy, the retreating German soldiers cut down trees in orchards and blew up bridges, seeded fields with landmines, and burned down hospitals and schools. In homes where they lived, soldiers smashed plates and wine glasses, sawed off legs of chairs, and ripped apart books. 90% of the region of Picardy was demolished. CARD president noted, "You can travel in a car going forward in a straight line for 15 hours and see nothing but ruins." Because many aid organizations supported wounded Allied soldiers, Anne Morgan and her partner in life and in philanthropy, Anne Marie Dyke, wanted to do more to help civilians and founded CARD. The French Army provided prefabricated wooden barracks so that this deck of cards could live in the war zone among the population that they served. In the town of Blérancourt, the grounds of the crumbling 17th century chateau became CARD headquarters. These women worked less than 40 miles from the front, where to the east the heavens lighted up with the flash of guns on the battlefront, while the winds brought the dull and rhythmic booming of the cannon. The town's population of 900 had dwindled to 200. The CARDs found French women and their children living in the cellars of their burnt-out homes or in damp limestone mines. Families needed beds, sheets, clothing, food, plates, books, and school supplies. But in the French region of Picardy, not everyone was convinced that pampered ladies would be of help. Local tax collector Gaston Haricot admitted to being disdainfully skeptical. He then observed the CARDs unloading trucks and carrying items into a hovel. Soon one was cleaning the place, another was assembling the bed and table, installing the oven, lighting, and preparing a meal. The CARDs were devoted to their work and to French villagers. By December 1917, over 7,500 acres were cleared and 7,300 saplings were planted. Working hand in hand, trust formed between the CARDs and the French. We knew their daily struggles of each of these victims. We knew their hopes, their disappointments, and their tragedies. Together, we tried to solve, to build, noted Anne Marie Dyke, CARD president. When the Germans attacked again in March 1918, the French turned to CARD for help. The chauffeurs evacuated thousands of civilians to safety, and several CARDs, including Anne Marie Dyke and Anne Morgan were awarded the Croix de Guerre, the War Cross Medal, for their courage under fire. But back to the librarian who stole my heart. As the head of CARD's library section, Jessie Carson focused on kids, and she had her work cut out for her. These children's fathers were either at the front or dead. During the brutal German occupation of northern France, mothers and children were enslaved, starved, and forced to do back-breaking work in the fields. Committee members noted that these kids had never learned to smile. But during her story hour, Jessie Carson read translations of books introducing children to characters such as Tom Sawyer and Anne of Green Gables. In Paris and in Picardy, Jessie Carson created something that did not yet exist in France: children's libraries and open stacks. She created cozy reading nooks with child-sized tables, chairs, and bookshelves. Elements that we take for granted today were brand new back then. Here's how French writer André Chevrillon described the situation. "One must not think the American Committee introduced public libraries in France. There are some in cities and villages, but they do not meet the needs of the community. They are incomplete and badly organized. Most are in small rooms, badly kept, and poorly lit. Readers are forbidden free access to shelves. Entrance is prohibited to the reader, who is invited to stand behind a railing. The public can only make the choice of a book by consulting a dirty, torn catalog. Librarians are clerks with no professional training and who are so overworked they can bring but little vitality and interest. When Jessie Carson trained the first French female librarians, there were some challenges. She noted, "It's not hard to find good students, but it is very hard to convince the parents that their children should study library methods and help create a new career." This is a photo of the first French women librarians at the International Library School, which was housed at the American Library in Paris. The French library establishment sneeringly called this school the Wild West Library School. Jessie Carson is standing on the left of her students there. The French government awarded her the Silver Star and the Palme Académique, Officier d'Académie Award. Created by Napoleon, this honor is meant for distinguished teachers. In Paris and in northern France, over 100 years later, these libraries still welcome patrons. And this year, the 150th anniversary of Jessie Kit Carson's birth, we remember this fearless librarian who helped bring about literacy and gender equality in France. I'll share one last photo of these amazing cards. Don't they look like a fun bunch? So 100 years later, librarians are still on the front. Only this time, it's a cultural war. Online, we can find everything from pornography to misogynists spewing their hate on YouTube channels. The nebulous internet feels beyond people's reach to legislate, so instead book banners turn their attention to libraries and to books, concrete symbols of learning. Study after study has confirmed that literacy and literature create empathy by allowing readers to see life through the eyes of others. But instead of open discourse on the power of books, a small minority has organized to pressure librarians, teachers, booksellers, and school board members to remove books that they personally find offensive. This view does not reflect the attitude of the general public. The Every Library Institute survey found that 91% of voters strongly or somewhat agree with the statement, "If you don't like a book at a library, don't check it out. Other people should not control what me or my family can read." We should have conversations instead of book bans. We should look for solutions and celebrate difference rather than blindly slamming the door on topics that make us uncomfortable. Book banning is a loud form of censorship, but there's also an insidious form of censorship. Women often disappear from history. The all-women unit of the American Committee for Devastated France was written out of history, even though they worked just miles from the front and received the War Cross Medal for their courage under fire. Until I started researching Miss Morgan's Book Brigade, I had never heard of Jessie Carson, even though I worked at the American Library in Paris, which housed the library school that she co-created. We need to share the contributions of women more widely. Writing, researching, and publishing are forms of resistance. Women belong in history books, and women deserve to be celebrated for their differences. I'll close by saying that in the world, every day seems to bring more tragedies, but I hope that reading and writing will bring solace and bring us together. One of my characters said that books are bridges, and I believe that with my whole heart. Many thanks for your attention, and many thanks for inviting me here today. I appreciate it very much.